Hello, everyone. We're just gonna obviously wait for everyone to join, and then we'll commence. Just for those of you joining, we are recording today's session.
Hi, everyone. Hello. Hi.
Hello, everyone. I was just letting everyone know, thank you, I was having camera issues. I am not Caroline Pacheco. I am Elma Lekic, just to let everyone know. I've realized how dark it is now. I'm trying to get the lighting going. We're just obviously gonna wait a few minutes to, I will keep admitting people in, and we'll wait maybe 6:05 to make sure everybody can join us, and then we will commence today's exciting training event. I see that the Honourable Augustin has joined us, which is excellent. The technical gods are on our side. So what will happen is if there's any questions or comments at the end, you guys can provide it in the chat, but I'll go through all of that in the housekeeping, just to let everyone know that's joining in right now. The session is being recorded. Okay. So obviously we'll have access to it later for those of us, unfortunately, that weren't able to make it today.
Elma, if you turn your body the opposite way so that the light isn't coming at your back, then we will be able to see you a lot better.
I'm trying to provide an air of mystery, Marcia. There we go.
Awesome. Listen.
Okay.
Perfect.
Done and done. Okay. I think this is okay.
Hi there. We're from the Junior League of Hamilton Burlington, and you were saying that you're going to tape this tonight. Is it possible for you to send a link to our president so that we can have it sent out? I know a lot of people wanted to be here tonight but couldn't make it.
Not a problem. We'll work something out. We'll definitely take a look and see what we can do, and we will provide you guys with a link to this training for sure to be able to share it amongst our league members across.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
No worries.
Hi, ladies. How's
Sorry, somebody was just speaking. I just hit mute all, but you guys have the option. If anybody wants to ask a question, you can unmute yourself just to eliminate any sort of background noise that we might be getting.
How is everyone doing? Any exciting stories to share? Any new adventures, Jonna?
I just went swimming with my 2 grandchildren who never got out of the water. I did, however, but they did not.
Awesome.
I was up at my cottage last weekend and there were 2 baby loons. So that was exciting to see the little baby loon from afar. We try not to get too close. But
Yeah,
it's
that's
nice to see
awesome.
the wildlife flourishing.
Yeah. Pam, your back is to the light, so we can't see you.
I'm going to close my curtains just a second.
Awesome.
Hi, everybody.
Hi there.
Hi.
Hi, Karen. Hi, Jess.
Nice to see everyone.
Hi, Alma.
Hi, ladies, and welcome everybody, and welcome Hamilton Burlington. I'm sorry I'm not going on video, but I'm actually not at home, so keep myself off.
We have some people from Calgary on as well.
Oh, awesome.
I know some were joining us, but I'm not sure who's on right now.
Welcome, Calgary.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Fantastic.
We're
Thank
so
you so much
excited.
for letting us join. We really appreciate this, and we're looking forward to hearing from the speaker. So yes, thank you for including.
You're welcome.
I think it's great when we can bring multiple leagues together, so I'm just really pleased everybody's been able to participate.
So we will give it 1 more minute, and then to respect everybody's time, we'll start at 6:05 and we'll get going.
Okay.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining today's training event. I think, you know, given with everything that's been going on in the world and obviously COVID and everything that's been taking place in the United States, in Canada with respect to Black Lives Matter movement, I think this was a perfect time to get something together as a league, presented across the board, invite our fellow league members from Calgary, from the Burlington Hamilton chapter as well, to join and participate. And, you know, if you have any questions, we are very, very lucky that we were able to ask the Honourable Jean Augustin to come and join us today and have a conversation with us as a league about her experiences, her past, and obviously what we can do as a league to provide more inclusivity and really provide diversity as a league as well. So a few housekeeping rules. I will mute everyone. You will have the option to unmute yourself and then ask a question. The format of tonight's event will be, we'll do about an hour to however long the conversation goes with our moderator, Karen Mell, who I'll be introducing very shortly. They'll do about an hour conversation. We'll leave the last hour to Q&A. I don't, if obviously the conversation's flowing and we're going, we can leave the questions to the very last. If you are camera shy or having any sort of technical audio issues that you can't ask your question, please feel free to provide it in the chat below. Just type your question and we can ask it at the very end. Alternatively, you know, if there's any background noise, please let us know, but everybody, it should be pretty clear, hopefully, moving forward. So I just wanted to thank my training team members for assisting today and providing the support and guidance to have this training event. We're excited that as we're beginning a new junior league year, that this is a great training event to kick off. Hopefully more conversations and more events like this to come. And yeah, I'm just keeping, for Caroline, I know you're on the line, I'm keeping tabs of who we got signed in today. So without further ado, Karen Mell, a fellow Junior League member, will be our moderator for this evening. Thank you very much, Karen, for agreeing to host and provide your ever-wise words and questions. Karen Mell is also the recent chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee for the Junior League of Toronto. So congratulations on that as well. Very, very important ad hoc committee that we've added on to our Junior League portfolio. Karen holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Toronto. Prior to entering the field of education, she was an award-winning corporate trainer for a number of Fortune 500 companies. After earning her Master of Science degree in education, she was promoted to vice principal and then appointed as principal with the York Regional District School Board, where she advocates for families and works to provide equitable access for education. Karen's community contributions include social causes with a focus on advancing equity and inclusivity through community engagement and collaborative action. Recognizing her leadership skills and work ethic, she was appointed chair of the Georgina Equity and Diversity Advisory Committee, chair of the Student Conferences Committee for York Region District School Board, and chair of the Scholarship Committee for the Newmarket African Caribbean Canadian Association. Today, she continues to advocate for women's empowerment and developing the leadership capacity of young people. Karen is the proud mother of 2 sons. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Karen, and just to let everyone know again joining us that we are taping this session tonight. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, Alma. That was a wonderful introduction. So I need to say that I am personally so excited about tonight. And but first, I want to begin by welcoming all of you. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend today's training event. Very important event and certainly historic. And you know, certainly with what's been happening in the United States and in Canada with regards to protests. And you know, with regards to also racism in Canada, that's really spread, you know, like wildfire, and we're talking a lot about it, which is important that we're doing. And I know that we've been having conversations as a league in regards to racial and social inequality and its impact on Black people in the Greater Toronto Area and in Canada. And so as a league, many of us are concerned and feel that we need to respond and ourselves begin the complex work of building a more inclusive and diverse organization. We are at the beginning of our journey and have established a Diversity and Inclusion Committee. So in case you missed the communication, we're still accepting members. For information, please feel free to contact me directly. And so let me say that we feel incredibly honored tonight to welcome Dr. Jean Augustin. She's accomplished so much that actually our 2 hours could be dedicated to talking about the many things that Dr. Augustin has contributed to our community to make Canada the incredible country that it is. And I just wanted to just highlight just a few of her accomplishments tonight so that we have a little bit of a background as to whose company we're in tonight. And so Dr. Augustin began her career as an educator and quickly rose up the ranks to become a supervisory officer with the Toronto Catholic District School Board. And she is the reason that we celebrate Black History Month every year, which is so incredible. And just a little bit of background. In 1995, she put a motion before Parliament to recognize February as Black History Month nationwide, and the motion was passed unanimously. And I can tell you as an educator, just that motion and the passing of that motion and the fact that we celebrate that impacts the lives of so many students, not just Black students, but it really opens the door to our unity and helping us all to understand the complexity and diversity of our history. Also, in 2002, Dr. Augustin was appointed Secretary of State for Multiculturalism and the Status of Women, making her the first Black woman to achieve a post in our cabinet, which is so amazing. And in 2003, she was appointed Minister of State, again, for Multiculturalism and the Status of Women, and later would become Deputy Speaker of Parliament. And in 2007, the Ontario government appointed her to the province's first fairness commissioner. Incredible. In 2009, she was made a member of the Order of Canada. And in 2014, Dr. Augustin was appointed commander of the Order of the British Empire. In 2017, the brand new state-of-the-art Jean Augustine Secondary School in Brampton was opened and named in her honor. Today, she continues her social activism and is heavily involved in education, as well as supporting young women through the Jean Augustine Center for Young Women's Empowerment. Dr. Augustin, we would like to offer you our our warm welcome to our discussion today.
Well, thank you so much, Karen, and thank you to all these beautiful faces that have turned up for this Zoom meeting. I was speaking with folks earlier and I said, I have been zoomed out. Yesterday I had 3 the day before. But it's a good way to reach out and a good way to reach across. I noticed that you have been able to bring in other chapter members, and therefore I want to say to you that this collaboration and partnerships and working together is really the way forward for all of us. I want to acknowledge that there is one face who is always before me at the Girls Center for Young Women's Empowerment, and that's Marsha, who is our Vice President, doing excellent work and helping us at this specific point in time to move forward with our partnerships. I spoke to Junior League a number of years ago, and I think Nadine Williams was associated at the time. I'm not too sure whether she was the chair or what her position was, but she was the one who invited me to Junior League, and I had a really interesting evening. So I'm looking forward to the fact that we'll have an interesting evening of discussion. And I don't want to do the school teacher thing, Karen, and lecture. And I know it's a training session, but I want it to be conversational, and I want not to use language that is more or less part of the academy, but to speak to you as I do to my neighbor down the hall.
Right.
So I hope that's okay with everybody. So you're training and you have pencils and you're ready to write all kinds of whatever. I'm not too sure that I'll give you that kind of vocabulary to use, but I'll speak to you about the things that are important, especially in these challenging times.
Thank you, Dr. Augustin. And yes, certainly we do want our conversation to be not full of academics, because we are educators, and so we're not wanting to fill people with knowledge, but to open the door to creating knowledge together. And so that's what we'll do tonight.
That's good.
So let's begin with the first question, though.
Yes.
Let's start our conversation there. So Dr. Augustin, I'd like to begin with setting a historical context for us, because we can't separate discussions about race, equity, and inclusion without taking our history into account. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. Actually, the Africans have, there is a bird in Africa, I'm not too sure whether it's all over Africa or in specific countries, but there's a bird called the Sankofa. And whenever the bird, you see the bird, the neck is looking back. And that's symbolic of the fact that in order to go forward, you have to know where you're coming from. You have to look back to the past, acknowledge the present so that you can know where you go as you go into the future. Right. So I think we're starting at the right place.
Excellent. So while Canada has had slavery for over 200 years, with the first record of that being in 1628, many of us have been led to believe that Blacks arrived in Canada only recently, perhaps the 60s, relatives to individuals of European descent. Tell us about the Black presence in Canada.
Well, when I come to Black presence in Canada, I go back to 1603. The first recorded Black person to have set foot in Canada was a young man called Matthew de Coster. And Matthew de Coster came on the voyage with Champlain in 1603, 1604. Matthew de Coster knew the Mi'kmaq language, and he was able to speak to these Aboriginal people in 1603 in their language. So again, making some deductions, we would say that if he knew the Mi'kmaq language in 1603, it meant that he would have had some way, or he would have had some meetings with them prior to 1603, because we knew there weren't a lot of Mi'kmaq people running around the ports in Europe. Matthew de Coster was a navigator. He was the one on the ship who, and when I speak to kids, I say, you know what a navigator is? He's the one who says right, left, wind, etc. And that was before we had GPS, of course,
right?
1603. And he navigated up the St. Lawrence and navigated into Canada. Great stories are told about that voyage. At the same time, Matthew de Coster is not part and parcel of that story. So those who learned at the voyage, coming of Champlain, don't know the story that with him. It's the same way as going to the north, right? The Black man who was part of that expedition, we somehow or the other, we don't tell and include those people in our history. And so I go back to 1603, Matthew de Coster, and your mention of 1628, we know that the first, this is documented now, we have the baptismal paper of this young boy who was brought in as an enslaved child and was baptized. And so we have the baptismal certificate, and we have evidence of the fact that here was an enslaved person. But we knew that there were the United Empire loyalists, the back and forth between our border, that we had people of African descent back and forth in Canada.
And that was Olivier Lejeune, correct?
Yes, Olivier, yes. And apparently his name came about, according to the story, when the priest asked, well, what would you call this child, this boy? And the name of the priest and the master's name were put together to give him Olivier Lejeune.
Exactly. And so just touch a little bit on the fact that we also had slavery in Canada, that our current economy, our way of life, our economic prosperity is based on the slave economy. Can you just speak briefly about that?
Well, there are great historians out there who are now digging up and writing those stories and getting the evidence. People like Afua Cooper, Natasha Henry, Carolyn Smarts-Frost. Their books and their writings are very important for you as you do research and you look into those areas. We know that that Simcoe, who was here in Upper Canada, John Graves Simcoe, was the first one to more or less say no more importation of slaves into Canada. And that came about because he heard of this woman who was enslaved, who came across the border, and her name was Chloe Cooley. And Chloe had come across the border at Niagara Falls. And story got to Governor Simcoe that she was taken by the slave catchers because they used to follow people over and into the Canadian border. And they were taking her back, and she was just screaming her head off. And when the reports got to John Graves Simcoe about that horrible, horrible experience that woman had in 1793, he says no more. At the same time, he could not get legislation passed because many of his councillors and many of the representatives all owned slaves, enslaved people at that particular point in time. And so we know 1703, and then of course we know that in 1807, the British Parliament passed an act forbidding ships from taking people from Africa. The transatlantic slave trade was more or less by the British slave ships. It didn't stop the other Europeans, but the British shippers were told that they could not carry people, import people from Africa into the Americas. That was 1807, but it was not till 1833. And of course, there are all kinds of names, Wilberforce and all those religious people and people who really wanted to see the end to this abomination. All those years, 1807, all the way in the early 1820s, 1830s, until 1833, the act was passed to abolish slavery. Not didn't abolish it. Was abolished in the British colonies. And Canada was a British colony, the Caribbean, and these areas, slavery was, but it was not until 1 year later, 1834, that the law came into force.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Augustin, because, you know, it's really important that we dispel the myth that slavery didn't exist in Canada, and that, you know, the enslaved men and women that left the United States to escape slavery in the US to come to Canada, that it was, you know, a land where slavery didn't exist. It was, you know, this place where Blacks were not marginalized and used as, you know, free labor brutally. That it was that kind of environment, that it was, you know, they were coming to this freedom, which really wasn't the case. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about the fact that slavery, yes, in Canada was prohibited on August 1st, 1834, which is a very significant day, which we celebrate every year. However, in 1867, there was a ban, an official ban on Black immigration to Canada. And further, in 1911, there was an order of council specifically banning people of African descent to enter Canada that remained up until 1962. Within that time, Canada paid for the immigration, transportation costs, and offered land grants to people of Northern, Eastern, and Southern European countries to settle in Canada. Under these circumstances, what was life like for Blacks living in Canada since 1834, since the abolishment of slavery?
Well, I think you want to take me down the road of the fact that in Canada, there was a sense that the Underground Railroad was the end all and the be all, that go to the north, that freedom was to the north. What we failed to say in our textbooks and to say quite openly was the fact that the United Empire Loyalists brought their slaves with them, that those enslaved people who came and who fought on the side of the British were promised land. There were several promises that were made, you know, to them as enslaved, as free people, as it were. At the same time, let's go back to the 1833 Act. What it did, it says you free throughout the British Empire, the British colonies. But what it also said was that those owners, those masters, were compensated for losing the enslaved people that they had to let go or set free. And so there were monies paid to the slaveholders for losing their labor. And nothing was given to the individuals. They were just told, well, you know, go, make your life. And at the same time, life was made so difficult for them that they had to go back almost in enslavement in order to eke out and to make a living. In the story out east, in terms of the lands that were promised, so much acres per man, and so much per wife, so much per child, for each child. Those lands were not given, and in places where they were given the worst. Impossible to really eke out a living from the land. And of course, there are all kinds of instances, and I think Afua Cooper has something around the 15 ships that sailed, leaving the shores of Canada and heading back to Sierra Leone and heading back to Africa because life was really tough. The story of Angelique and the way that that the enslaved people were treated, the places where they were buying and selling and bartering for Black people are still places that you could locate in our cities and in our country. The whole issue around or places like southwestern Ontario. The enslaved people walked all the way from the south, all the way up to Owen Sound and places like that, and there are still monuments and other churches, grave sites that are being found today. And so when I look at educators like yourself and others, we are now beginning to dig up a lot of that history because now we have people who are in universities doing archival work, museum work, history, etc., etc. So in other words, we're getting the information, we're having the information, and it's so important that as Canadians, we know this Black history, the story of Black Canadians. There was, if you read the Globe and Mail, I think 2 weeks ago, there was a judgment that was made by one of the higher courts that, of the land that said that this couple whose lands were given 100 and something years ago in Nova Scotia, Preston, East Preston, had no claim to the land. They've been living there for over 100, generation after generation after generation. They gave them the land, but they had no document, no piece of paper to show that they are real owners, and therefore they can use that land as leverage to do what people usually do when they own property.
Yeah, and that's happening right now as we speak, which is, unlawful. And they're, to add to that, Jean, they're even changing the boundaries. So some of the boundaries in that area are being changed so that you can't claim that your address is in Preston, it's in a different municipality. And that makes it even more difficult for you to claim what is rightfully yours ancestrally, which is so unfortunate that people are creating policies and hiding behind policies.
Well, the thing is, I think we'll get to the whole issue of systemic discrimination, because when things are built into system, when the policies are such, when the legislative processes are such that they deny you certain rights and privileges and opportunities, then it's so very difficult to struggle, to fight, and to make and to get to see oneself as an equal partner in the society.
Yeah. So just to encapsulate with that particular question, there was slavery in Canada that has existed for 200 years. And after, 1834 marked the end of slavery. But after that point, life was still very difficult. And as you said, so hard to eke out an existence as a Black person in Canada, that you were treated, although you weren't owned, almost as if you were.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
At the same time, immigration laws were
Right.
used to keep Black people out of Canada.
Mhm.
And there were all kinds of subjective things that were said. They couldn't withstand the cold. They could not, all kinds of different
Yeah.
subjective things were said to keep the immigration. And for a long time, it was almost like if you were white, then you can immigrate. If
Right.
you weren't, then there were all kinds of things put in the way
Mhm.
of immigrating or moving to Canada.
So you talk about Afua Cooper's work, and in reading some of her work, one of the stories that really broke my heart, and for a person, but as a Canadian, thinking that what we lost. So after the First World War, there were quite a number of blacks that were studying medicine, and I do believe it's Queen's University they were studying medicine at, and essentially, after the war, they were told that they needed to leave because the patients at the neighboring hospital didn't want Black people to touch them. And so they were essentially deported. And some of them were in their final year of medical school. And at least 36 students were ousted out of Canada, out of medical school, out of their dreams. And that is just so incredibly sad, such a sad moment in our history.
Yeah, well, Karen, there were several other sad moments. For example, we named the $10 bill after
Viola Desmond.
Viola Desmond.
Mm-hmm.
Viola Desmond had to go to the US in order to be able to go to hairdressing school.
Mm-hmm.
And there'd be all kinds of people who tell you that they had to go to the United States in order to get the kind of education because the schools will not let them in.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly enough, Queen's University was going, in its earlier times, were going bankrupt. There was just no funding and the programs and whatnot. They were about to close their doors simply because there was no funds.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one man, a Jamaican man, Sutherland, who donated at the time $12,000 at the time, that saved Queen's University.
Incredible.
And for a long time, Queen's University never admitted to that donation by this Black man until the activists and others pushed to ensure that that story was told. I think right now there's a bust of Sutherland someplace around the campus. But for a long time, Queen's University, that story was not a story that was open to the public.
So without Mr. Sutherland, many of us who've attended Queen's University, I'm not a Queen's University alumni, but you can thank, Mr. Sutherland for your Queen's University degree, should you have gone there, right?
That's right.
So I want to talk a little bit about you, Dr. Augustin. Tell us about how you entered Canada. What was the context?
Well, to talk about my coming to Canada, one has to begin to talk about what Canada was doing in the world in the 50s and the 60s and a little before, a little after World War II. Canada was very much engaged with the colonial, remember Grenada, the island where I'm from, Grenada was ceded to Britain at the same time as Canada was. It was a little package that was put together by the French and ceded to Britain, 1763. And Grenada was one of the islands. And there was a lot of connection between the Caribbean and Canada.
Mhm.
We sent them rum, and we sent them the tobacco, and we sent that kind of stuff, and they sent us.
And we sent codfish.
They sent us. They sent us codfish.
We sent them sugar.
So
Yeah.
so the boats came up with with the sugar and the rum, and they brought back the codfish. So there was always a lot of trade and good relations between Canada and the Caribbean.
Hmm.
Canada in the 50s were building schools through its funding programs, so that if you go through the islands and you talk to anyone, they can show you a schoolhouse that was built by and with Canadian funds. Around the late 50s, they were very much engaged with the Federation. There was a point in time where all of the islands were talking about forming a federation, coming together so that they could work and operate as one group. Right now, today, if you go to Trinidad, there's one currency. If you go to Barbados, there's another currency.
Right.
If you go to Grenada, and one does not take the other's currency, which is kind of interesting. The United States dollar is the one that is accepted everywhere there.
Mhm.
But anyway, the 50s, they were building schools. They were part of helping with the Federation, and then of course that fell apart. The big plan to spread different ministries in different islands, etc., that fell apart.
Mhm.
And Canada was looking at the unemployment of young people in the Caribbean, lots of unemployment. When I left high school in 1955, I had 4 avenues open for employment. I could be a teacher, I could be a nurse, I could be a civil servant, I can work in somebody's home, or I can work in my own home, housewife.
Mm.
And we had, at the time, we had, there were thoughts about the University of the West Indies, but we had no post-secondary institutions of any kind. So that young people were going away to university. They were going to the US, they were going to Europe. Lots and lots of young people from the Caribbean were going to England and Scotland, and a lot of graduates from the University of Edinburgh, etc., etc. But if you were in my situation where you didn't have the resources, the money to go, then you were part of the unemployed groups on the island. And so Canada decided to help the Caribbean islands with their young people. And of course, they couldn't say, young people, line up, come, we're taking you to Canada. But what they said was, we are setting up a Canada-Caribbean domestic scheme. If you are between the ages of 18 to 24, and you want to go to Canada to work in the home of a Canadian family for 1 year, then you could remain in Canada. We give you landed immigrant status. Well, of course, here was my opportunity. I signed up, and I was one of those who came to Canada in what was called the Canada-Caribbean Domestic Scheme. The scheme ran from 1955 to 1968, and about 3,000 young women from around the Caribbean came to Canada and worked in the homes of several different families, especially in the major cities in Canada. It was all orchestrated by, it was called Manpower at the time. And I'm looking at all these young faces in front of me. They wouldn't even know what Manpower was. Because it's not called Manpower anymore. And I came on TCA, Trans-Canada Airline, which is now called Air Canada. I came with a British passport because None of the islands at the time had its own independence. We were all citizens of Britain. We were all part of the Commonwealth. So I had my British passport, and I arrived in Canada with my British passport and worked for 1 year in the home of a Canadian family as a domestic. And from there, went on to Teachers College. So that was my beginning.
Amazing. And look at what you did with that opportunity. I think you have really done a lot with it, a lot, for lack of a better phrase, right? Amazing. So another question. So you came over on that scheme and you said about 3,000 women did as well.
Over the number of years.
Yeah. So you've done really well. But I wonder, the question lands in my mind, what was life like for the 3,000 of you? How were you received? And after that year was up, what happened? We know what happened to you, Dr. Augustin.
Yes.
But what do you think might have happened to some of those other 3,000 women after that year?
The 3,000 women, as I said, between 1955 to 1968, that's how you get the 3,000. Many of them are making great contribution to Canadian life. Many of them have raised families here, have brought families from the Caribbean, extended families. Many of them have been contributing members of Canadian society. Many of them got into the workplace after the 1 year of domestic work. I think the individual made choices. Some people went out west. Some people went into places with sexy names. I remember when they asked us, where do you want to go? And someone says, Saskatchewan. What is that word over there? I'll go there.
That's hilarious.
Right, they had this map and we can pinpoint on the map after we landed. They were asking us, where do you want to go? Right. And I said Toronto because I knew some friends who had been who had been in Toronto.
Right.
But I think it's important that when I landed in Toronto, 1960, Toronto was a different place than it is today. A different place. We had no, and I keep saying that in several of my speeches, we had no Charter of Rights and Freedom then. That didn't come till 1982. We had no Landlord and Tenant Act. So a landlord can say it's for rent, but not for you. We had no rules that governed relationships among people. We didn't have any complaints, human rights complaints, procedures. We didn't have police community relations. We didn't have school board talking to parents or trustees talking to parents about school issues. We didn't have after school programs. The school was locked at the end of the day. Everybody went home and that was it. There were so many things that were missing. There were no faces on the television, the few stations that there were at the time, no face that looked like mine. You walk through department stores or you walk through places, you didn't see the array of faces that you see today. And so therefore, when you saw someone and you saw them with a nice head of hair, nicely done, you said, where did you get your hair done? Who did it? Or you would find out where, one can get the grocery stores and places like that. The shelves were not stocked with what we have today. So we've now moved from 1960, where because of activism, because of the fact that we had to knock down doors. We had demonstration after demonstration, weekend after weekend, going to see the head of the CBC and media people, going to see the owners, the managers in department stores, asking for them to have images that look like ourselves and our children in the flyers that they put out. We had to demonstrate about injustices, and especially things around policing, which have not changed over these many years. And so activism, and so I began my life right from day one as an activist.
Yes.
And my very first big challenge to the system came about when I went to get the documents to sign up for Teachers College. And in those days, you went to Teachers College. So there was Toronto Teachers College and Lakeshore Teachers College here in Toronto. And so you had to go to the ministry, get the form, fill the form out. And then, so when I went, and there, I was so proud of the fact that I came with Oxford and Cambridge Overseas School Certificate, A-level, and piano, this, that, and all the pieces of paper. I had a whole folder with all my stuff in it. And I went to the counter, and this woman said to me, who was in attendance, she said, she didn't even bother to look. She just said, you have to go and do grade 13, sorry. And I thought, I have more than grade 13 here. And she would not look at my document. And so my first big disobedience was I didn't block the cage to her, the entrance to her desk, but I stood on the side and I thought I won't move until she opened up my...
Good for you.
And I always remember that as my first big act of disobedience, which created a little bit of a hub. And then one other woman came who I think she was either Irish or Scottish, I'm not too sure, but she knew the system. She knew what overseas school certificate was. And she said, oh, no. She has entrance to university here. And I showed her, and I mean, in the package, I had entrance to about 4 or 5 different universities. I was writing to all the time, but I didn't have the money for tuition, the money for accommodation, the fact that I had to return as soon as I was finished with school, etc. And the system, and again, we have to go back to the things that are built into the system and people who are making sure that they uphold what these things are within the system.
Well, the injustices and, you know, your story, we're going to get into implicit bias, you know, a little later on in our conversation, but it just reminds me of implicit bias. You know, you having such difficulty just getting into Teachers College, and you had all the qualifications already, but the fact that the person didn't see you as an educated person, already qualified, perhaps even, well, you were already a teacher. You were already a teacher, first-time teacher. But she didn't look at you because of the color of your skin as someone who was educated, who could have already had those qualifications, which, you know, is implicit bias. But I digress. We will continue with our questions. Okay, but I need to also say, so I read Denham Jolly's novel, his autobiography, and you were featured prominently in that autobiography. The fact that you guys would hang out in your apartment and plan how you're going to go about doing your activism, right? Yeah, so your apartment was the hub. Am I right?
Oh yes. It was called the Embassy.
Right. So it was pretty amazing.
But the thing is that we had to get together. And this is what is sometimes missing in our Black community now. The fact that we don't kind of get together and share and come up with one path that we want to take. Because oftentimes what happens in a lot of instances, and I see this happening now, people are going in this direction, that direction, undercutting each other, and therefore we don't make the progress we should make. In those days, there were so few of us that we had to be collaborators.
Right.
We had to know what each one is going to say, and we had to argue back and forth as to what is the position we're going to take. And we had some allies. We had some white friends. For example, Dan Hill's, Lawrence Hill's mother was one of those allies. She was a white woman. So when I would go for a job and they say no, to me, then she will go right after me and get the job.
Right.
And then so we had a case that we could make as a result.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And at the time, because we didn't have rules, people can say anything to you. So for example, when I remember my husband and I saw shortly after we were married, saw this this apartment for rent, a triplex, and there was a note on the thing, apartment for rent. And we knocked at the door, and this man opened it, and he said, "It's for rent, but not for you." And he closed the door. You couldn't say that today, right? The same with one of the big companies. They had an ad out looking for clerical help. So the folks that I was working with at the time, she said, you know, maybe you can get your feet wet by going for this job. I went, and it was a 1-page. In those days, they gave you a 1-page with a little bit of math, a little bit of social studies type thing. Where is that? Da, 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 da. And, you know, I, as the kids would say, I aced it in no time and brought it back. And the woman said, we'll call you. And then the job was still advertised 2 weeks later. So when I went, this HR person came traipsing along, and she said to me, I said, I'm inquiring about, you know, the job because I applied, and, you know, you try to be as humble as you can.
Right.
And I was just wondering whether I see the job is still available. She says, oh yes, we talked about you. You passed, you did it, you passed the entire, whatever it was. And we talked a good deal about you, but we came down to the fact that you were not a right fit for a company. I was not a right fit. Well, we don't talk about fit now, but we use other nuanced language.
That's right. We use other terms. Absolutely. Yeah, there are other terms that are currently being used to keep people out of certain positions. Yes, and we're going to talk about that. I can't wait. So, Dr. Augustin, you made political history in 1993 as the first Black woman ever elected to the nation's House of Commons. Incredible. And then 9 years later, you achieved yet another historic advance when you became the first woman of African heritage to serve as cabinet minister in Canada. What led you, we talked about you being an activist, but what led you to dip your toe into politics? It's a big thing.
Well, it was not. When I was growing up in Happy Hill, St. George's, Grenada, I didn't say I'm going to go to Canada and I'm going to go into politics in Canada. Those are things, and I use that phrase I picked up somewhere. Opportunity knocks. My grandmother used to say that opportunity knocks, you must be ready. But then there's someone further who said, opportunity dances with those who are on the dance floor. So put yourself on the dance floor, opportunity is gonna come. I had been, as you said earlier, I had been all the way through the educational system, from classroom teaching, vice principal, resource teacher, principal, supervisory officer. So I made my way through the system. And it was not easy, Karen. I know that you guys today may have had it a little easier.
Maybe a little, but not much.
when you're one of about 4 or 5 Black people in the whole system, you know, it's a little different. And I watched weaker colleagues invited to come put you, in those days they used to do stuff like that. Come put in your name for vice principal. Come put in your name for whatever. I was never invited to come put in my name, even though I know I was as good as and a better teacher than so many. And I had done my work because I grew up with the whole notion that education is important and that you have to, you know, my grandmother used to say, you have to have your pieces of paper, get the pieces of paper. And so I had all my pieces of paper. You know, I had my BA, we used to do all of those those departmental courses. I had the art, I had the new math, I had whatever was going.
We call them additional qualifications now, Dr. Augustin. AQs.
Well, I had every AQ that there was. And I spent my summer and I spent my evenings and whatnot in school, at university. And so I had everything. I was ready, but I was never really called by the board, as I've seen as was done to some of my other colleagues who I think were weaker teachers than I was. And so the issue of my getting there was really something in my head that said, be as qualified as you possibly can so that when you put yourself forward, you have everything to stand on. Right?
Yeah.
So I, by 1980, the late 70s and 80s, I had become very much engaged with community work and political organizing. As I said to you from the very beginning, we were organizing, but it's structurally trying to support people in the political arena. I had I was no card carrying for any specific party, but I helped everybody that I felt can make a difference. And I was appointed to different things. In the hospital for sick children, I was the only Black person. I think I may have been the first Black person appointed to that board back in the 70s. I was on the board of Harborfront and status of women and a whole lot of stuff. Got engaged with Pierre Trudeau and a lot of people who were doing some great things around the just society and talking about who are we in Canadian society? Are we just English and French? And the consultations that were done across the country, bringing us back to the fact that we were not just English and French, but that we were multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, society, and all the work that was taking place. And I was fortunate to be pushed together with Tony Johnson, was a professor at Dalhousie at St. Mary's University at the time, and others, to write the multiculturalism and education piece. So I was very much involved in the issue of multiculturalism. Later, I was appointed to the Metro Toronto Housing Authority. And it was there that the reality of people's lives struck home. That they're there, but for the grace of God, go I. That someone whose life could be whatever, with a divorce, with death, with something, can just whip them right off from where they are and put them in a socioeconomic situation where there were difficulties. I saw the mental health issues. I saw the gay, lesbian, and other communities, the struggle that there is. I saw the poverty, the underemployment, as well as the unemployment. And with all the things that we were doing in terms of activism, my sense was that the decisions were made in places of power. The decisions were made by people in the political arena. And that's where the push had to be, to make laws and to make structures such that it could better the lives of individuals. And so I started to push people into running. Why don't you run? Why don't you this? I worked on people's campaigns and whatnot. And then when it came to why don't you, it became a really difficult question for me to, I kept saying, I'm not a politician. I don't like the way the media treats people who are in politics. Right? I don't want my public life to be, to be all on the pages of whatever. So I kept pushing other people. And then of course, all of the parties came calling. You know, first I was asked by John Tory to run with Kim Campbell. And I said, no, I just was not, because we had gone through a really rough time with Brian Mulroney and the critique of some of the things that were happening there. I said, no, I'm not conservative. Then Bob Ray, and I said, no, Bob, I don't think I'm NDP, and And then the Liberals wouldn't take no for an answer. So I had one lunch, one breakfast, one dinner, 2 lunches, 3 breakfasts. And the numbers kept growing until
really
I
had
said,
to twist your arm, Dr. Augustin.
So I said, okay. And then I had a director of education who was really, really very supportive, who said, well, if anything happens, you always have your job at the school board to come back to.
All right, plan B.
So it was risk taking.
Amazing. That's so amazing. And you know, you had everything, but you were preparing. You didn't know you were preparing, but you were actually preparing with all this activism.
I was prepared.
You know, and your grandmother's wise words, right? Amazing. So we're gonna now just, you know, move the conversation a little bit, and we're gonna really get into, you know, issues of race. So when we talk about issues of race, it's important that we define terms so that we're all on the same page. What is your definition of anti-Black racism?
Well, this was a term that came into being after one of the reports that was done, after one of the killings or the shooting by police against all Black, especially Black young men being shot. I think it was Akua Benjamin who first threw that. She said, you know, it's not just that it's Black, it's anti-Black, they're against Black. And so this notion of anti-Black racism. And so we know when we speak about racism, we speak about the fact, we speak about power. Some people have power over others. That there are some people who, by their manner, they discriminate. That there are several power things within the systems, several things within the system that create power imbalances. And so when we talk about anti-Black racism, we're talking about the racism that's directed towards Black folks. You know, there are people who said, we discriminate all the time against all kinds of people. But when we talk about anti-Black, we're talking about specifically those things that are against people who are of African descent. The United Nations has just declared a decade for people of African descent because the information gathered, the research and everything that's done all around the world shows that wherever there are people of African descent, their lot seem to be the same, no matter what country we're talking about.
That's right. That's right.
And there were some countries who used to say, well, you know, I mean, they're all our citizens. I remember being in Brazil a number of years ago, and they say, we're all Brazilians. We don't have Black Brazilians and white Brazilians and whatever else. And yet at the same time, any measure that you take, people who were of African descent always fell, whether it's economics, whether it's financial, whether it's poverty, whether it's housing, whether it's mental health, Blacks fell to the bottom.
Yes.
And so by declaring this decade for African descent, the United Nations has called on all the nations of the world to look at their populations of African people of African descent and make sure that we change this imbalance, make sure that we understand the power relations, make sure that we give to those of our citizens the same rights and privileges and opportunities as we give to all of our citizens.
Yeah. So Dr. Augustin, I know that some people might think, why is it that we have to talk about anti-Black racism? As you said, there are so many groups that are discriminated against. But as you said, that worldwide, there is an absolute trend of people of African descent being marginalized no matter where you go on planet Earth, right?
Yes.
That is why we need to speak specifically about anti-Black racism, because there's no other group of people who are treated and oppressed as much as we are. Would you agree with that?
And that's why we have to go back, as I talked about Sankofa earlier. All of this has arisen as a result of colonialism, as a result of slavery, as a result of the fact that of greed, and also, I mean, there is just so much to unpack in all of this, because I think even within religion, right?
Yes.
What does Christ look like? Or what does, so again, we have a way of making, and our language is loaded with anything that's, someone said to me the other day, the only thing that's good is when you're in the black.
That's the only time, yeah. But every other descriptor, right? Related to Black is always negative. Even when you look in the dictionary, Dr. Augustine, you look in the dictionary and everything, all the descriptors about Black are negative. But when you look at the dictionary, same dictionary, Webster's, and white, it is, angelic, without flaw, moral, and it's the opposite side of the coin when you're looking in the dictionary about Black. And there's so much in our vocabulary as speakers of English. And I do speak 2 languages, so French, and the same for that language too, I'm going to say, that has a negative connotation when it comes to that particular color, and that negative connotation is then superimposed on people that look like you and me. Yes? Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about systemic racism now. So we know we've just discussed the definition of anti-Black racism. Actually, I want to go back. How have we all been taught to be anti-Black? And I include myself as a Black woman, as a Black person. We've all been taught to be anti-Black. None of us are immune to that socialization, because it really is the bedrock of our society.
But because so much in this, there is just so much that point to white. And I think some of the faces I look here, blonde. It's supposed to be light and goodness and whatever. For generations, and I think it's still happening in places, people have bought skin whitening to make their skin lighter. That mothers preferred to have their daughters marry someone who is lighter skinned so they can have lighter children. Children growing up in families, the one who is lighter was always supposed to be the one that would get more opportunities in life. Within the whole issue of the slave and the slave colonies, the lighter skin, the mulatto, was able to find a little better life than the one who was really Black and dark skinned. So it's somehow, because we put everything white as being good, and we start really very with young children. I'm sure you know the story of the study that was done in the U.S. way back, I think was in the 50s or 60s, where children were asked to select dolls, and everybody wanted the white doll and not the Black doll. And the inquiry as to why such a young kindergartner would be able to differentiate. And nothing is more painful to a Black mother than to have her child say to her, I want to be white, or I want to, I want to look like whatever.
Yeah. But it happens, right? And it happens even
happens.
now, and it happens even now. And even that particular experiment, there have been some new ones, more recent, that have netted the same results, Dr. Augustin.
Mhm, mhm.
And, you know, as, you know, the mom of two boys, that is, you know, truly, that's a conversation that we have to have and continue to have, because the pressure to believe that your Black skin is inferior is so strong. And it's so easy as a Black person to internalize that and turn that into, you know, self-hatred, right?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because and this is why the issue of role models are so important.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you, Karen, can be a principal and stand up in front of, or a supervisory officer and stand up in front of umpteen young people, and they see you, then they have something to, I can be like this. I can aspire to be. But when there are no role models around, when there is no one who look like them in a position of authority, a position of counseling, a position of showing them what a person that look like them could be, then I think this is what destroys their self-esteem.
Yeah. And not to mention the media portrayals of Black people, right? The movies, the TV shows. I remember my dad and I sitting watching Batman and Robin, one of my favorite cartoons. And then my dad said to me, or was it Spider-Man? I think it was Spider-Man. And he said to me, Karen, what is the difference between the good guy and the bad guy? Can you tell me what the difference is as we're watching this? And I was looking and I couldn't see it. I couldn't. And then he said, Karen, the bad guy, he is Black. He's Black. He's very dark. And the good guy is very light. And I want you to be conscious of that as you're watching TV, because that is how they're portraying Black people. But I don't want you to believe that. Black people aren't bad. Black guys aren't bad. It's the way that Black people are being portrayed, you know, as prostitutes, drug dealers,
yes,
you know,
yes.
criminals, not to be trusted, right?
Yeah. Tarzan.
Yes, yeah. So the media has a very strong influence on us, and if we don't believe that, then, you know, I don't know. We are socialized. We are human beings. We are social, you know, animals, and we are not immune from being socialized. And in fact, we are being socialized to believe those things and accept those things and treat people in that way. Correct?
And that's why it's important to tell our story.
Mm-hmm.
There is another African proverb that says, if the lions had their own historians, the tale of the hunt would be completely different.
Right.
So who is telling the story?
Right.
Who is telling the story?
Yeah.
And therefore, it's so important for us to be writers. It's so important for us to tell our story and to tell the story. Because when that's missing, then you create, again, this imbalance.
Right, right. So let's talk, we talked a little bit about it, but how would you define systemic racism?
Things that are built within systems, policies, procedures, ways of operating, hiring and firing and promotional opportunities, all built within policies, within systems. And so when we talk about dismantling or doing something about racism, we have to look at those things that are built into system. There's another, if you think about a classroom, and the teacher is away, and you get what is called, I'm not sure what you call it today, but you get a supply teacher.
Yes.
And the kids are all saying, that's not how my teacher does it, right? That's not how she does it. Wanting you to do it exactly like it's done by whatever. So when there are things built into the system that this is the way you have to behave, this is the way you have to act, this is the way. I remember when I first came and lived with that Jewish family that I spent that year with, I noticed whenever she was going shopping, and she used to go to the high-end stores on Bloor Street. She always put on her best dress or best suit. In those days, you used to have gloves. She always had her gloves in her hand, and she always looked whatever. And one day I said, "You going shopping and you're all dressed up?" She says, "Yes, I get better service when I'm dressed up. I get better service." Right? Remember the story a number of years ago, Oprah Winfrey?
Yes.
In a store in Europe somewhere, was reaching for a purse that was, I think, $3,000 or something, and the store clerk wouldn't take it down to her or show it to her,
Right.
because she assumed that she
didn't-
cannot buy a purse that's a $3,000 purse. So there are things built into the system, built into the notions, built into the headspace.
Yes, the headspace. It's the belief.
Right? The beliefs.
Right, which then present themselves as the treatment, the disrespect,
Yes.
the low expectations,
Yes.
the negative, stereotypes that are being,
Yes. Yes.
projected onto Black people.
That's right.
Yeah. So we talked about a little bit about what systemic racism looks like for Black people. And as an educator, you know that we've had a lot of media coverage about Peel Region District School Board. And, I thought I wasn't going to talk about Peel, but, I have to talk about Peel Region, Peel District School Board. Because Peel District School Board, as bad as it is no different than other school boards. And that is a great example, because we all care about education, of what systemic racism looks like. So I digress, but Dr. Augustin, can you help us using the education system to help us understand what systemic racism is?
Well, I think that teachers are part of the general population, so they have their own prejudices, their upbringing, the things that they have assimilated, the things that they put into their heads, the way of operating. And so when they become teachers, they don't kind of throw all of this off. And then the system itself was built on levels of, you can go to high school, you can go to university, you can take whatever courses, you can do whatever. And so the system had a way of streaming, looking for individuals to send in different directions. And so for years and years, one of the things that Black parents had to do was fight against streaming. Guidance counselors and others who were saying, you won't be able to do this. You have to do so and so, because they had an idea, or they had something within their own upbringing and within their own thinking, that this is the work for Black people and this is the route for white people. So those things are built in there. And until teachers are really, just as policemen have to be, trained and
held
retrained,
accountable,
put through upgrading, put through assessment, move them around from one place to the next, not have them in the same classroom doing the same thing year after year after year, making sure that we expose them to so much in the society, things won't change.
Right.
Things won't change.
Right. So we talked about education, but many of our members are not involved in education. What does that look like in terms of just working in the corporate world, the systemic racism with regards to employment?
Well, again, it's a promotional, I always go for the promotional opportunity. You're at the front. A number of years ago, I would imagine it's changed now because I'm dating myself now. A number of years ago, I was given a tour of one of the bank buildings on Bay Street. And we started in the bottom floor, the first whatever level floors, and you see some Black faces scattered here and there. You get up to another floor and you see some Asian thing. And then where they have all the computers and the technical thing, you see some more Asians. And as you keep going up, less and less of any person of color. And by the time you reach to the head honcho's offices, you don't see a person of color. So one gets in at a certain level, and somehow or the other, it's almost as though you stalled at that level.
Right.
No opportunity for either upgrading, no opportunity for one to get the kind of modeling or the kind of mentoring to move oneself away from there. So it's as though this is what you can do, and we'll let you do it, and we'll keep you here. There have been places where people see others come, they train them, and they watch them move up while they remain at that thing. So I mean, in corporate Canada, I think this is a major problem. I see the lack of opportunities, the lack of when you look at the corporate boardrooms, right? You look at the decision makers. When you look at the people with power, you don't see the diversity of faces there. Yeah. And I think that has to change. And it seems to me, with the urgency of now, there is talk by corporate leaders that they will do something. They'll have 5%, they'll have whatever. And of course, they do all of these things like by year 2025. Right. Well, my goodness, we want it now.
Well, yes, we don't want to wait. We don't want to wait. And there's no reason for us to wait, because there are many of us that have the education, that have the skills, the knowledge, and dispositions to be able to do well in those positions, but we're just not being given the opportunity.
I co-chair the 100 accomplished Black Canadian women. And we did 2018, 2016, 2018, and 2020. We have now 300 accomplished Black Canadian women, qualifications galore, stay in school galore, stay, not one day, not one PhD, 2 PhDs.
Oh my gosh.
Years in the workplace. And we have all of those women. So if corporate Canada is looking for, a
qualified workforce,
I'm putting those names out there. We also have a database where we ask women to put in their information to make sure that their names could be accessed. But I think it's so important to know that there are so many people who are, and this is why I talked earlier about underemployed, because there are a lot of people who are underemployed. They have the qualifications, they just never got the opportunity to move themselves up.
Right, and that's not because of a lack of effort. Yeah. It's because of that systemic racism and the implicit bias, which we'll get into shortly.
And there was other things in the workplace. And you look around, you have friends at work. Maybe you might go out with them to lunch, or maybe you might do something with them that everybody in the office is doing. But how many Black friends do you bring home? How many Black friends you bring to your barbecue, or you bring to your whatever else? So the friendship, as it were, is kind of like a superficial. It's on the job friend. You get there in the morning and you say hi, and you say this, and you exchange whatever. The end of the day comes, and you go to your white world, and they go to their Black world, and very little of those kind of interactions happen. And when they do happen, they really create a better work environment, because we get to know each other and we get to understand each other.
Yeah. So there definitely are, a big part of, being able to move up the ladder to get certain positions is that relationship building, is that networking. And absolutely, Dr. Augustin, in order for you to know and be assured that someone Black is the right person, you have to get to know them. And how does that happen outside of the workforce, right? Or a lunch date? It's actually having those social connections. And if you are, as you say, as a white person, limiting your social contact with Black people or people of color, just at the workplace, you are missing out on, first of all, a great opportunity to build a friendship, but also you're missing out on the opportunity to educate yourself as to who Black people really are, and building a relationship that can support someone highly qualified and capable to move to a position that they deserve.
Mhm.
Would you agree with that?
Well, I would agree with that. There's a story I tell coming back from, I think I was in the Sudan a number of years ago, and from the Sudan to Montreal or to Toronto is just hours and hours on the plane. And I'm sitting beside this white man, and I can tell he was uncomfortable. I always try to make people comfortable because I'm a talker, and I'm a sleeper too, so I don't talk the whole night. So I said hello and whatnot, and he just, you can tell he was a little uncomfortable. You know, of all the seats, why is it this Black woman had to sit beside me?
Right.
He said absolutely nothing to me the whole 17, 18 or how many hours, right? But I can almost feel his uncomfortableness.
Yeah.
About 45 minutes before we land, you know how they pass out the passport, the
customs
forms.
papers. Yes.
Right. They passed out the forms, and I pulled out my passport. And when he saw my passport, he said, because I had a diplomatic passport at the time, "How did you get that?" So I didn't answer, of course. And from that time, for the next 45 minutes, he never stopped talking.
Incredible.
Right?
Incredible.
So all of a sudden, for all these hours before, I was a kind of nobody sitting beside him. I was kind of this Black woman that was making him a little uncomfortable, just in case maybe somebody walked by and think I am with him or he's with me. I don't know what his rationale was. And then all of a sudden, I have something that shows that I am a step above where he is in terms of his citizenship, and all of a sudden he wants to talk. So
Right.
we do that, we do a lot of this with people. We make assumptions about them.
Yes.
And that's, no matter what we say about the Americans, one of the things in the US is the very easy way in which people say hello, and people kind of greet you. You're in the store and you're trying something on and someone would say, "I don't think that looks nice on you," or "I think this is a great top," you know, or something like that. People make these light conversations.
Right.
And acknowledge the fact that you're a human being.
Exactly.
Right? I live in a condo, and when I get to the elevator, I force people into speaking. Because we get in the elevator and we pull our shoulders together and we say nothing.
Yeah.
And people are coming in, they don't say because again, I grew up in the Caribbean where you used to say good morning, good morning,
Right.
good night, good evening.
Yeah. Which we should do. I mean, it should not even just be in the Caribbean. That is just being a polite human being and, you know, acknowledging the humanity of another person.
Well, yes, it's not so much polite as it is acknowledging the humanity.
Yes,
acknowledging.
absolutely. Yes.
Acknowledging.
Yeah.
You know, the fact that here is another human being. That it's not that you expect any big conversation, but you want to make it such that you acknowledge that this is another human being who is standing beside. And we need to do more of that as we wait on the bus, in the subway, or wherever. If we just smile at each other, it's a way of opening up that knowledge.
Yeah. So, Dr. Augustin, I've got to say, you know, privilege is oftentimes hard for those of us who are born with access to power and resources, and the resources that go with that power. Hard for us to see that, and hard for us sometimes, those of us with privilege, to even know that we have privilege, right? To, you know, but I can tell you that most of us in this conversation have privilege, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So white privilege, is my understanding, is having an advantage, right, as a white person, that just by virtue of being white, that you have over everybody else. So you walk into a store, you go anywhere, you can be assured that you will be treated with respect, right? You know that. You don't even have to think about it. You just go and do your daily thing. Where someone that may look like me, you wonder, and then, you know, you might go shopping, and then you're being followed by whoever that secret security officer is, right? Or just as you said, you go into perhaps a high-end store because you can afford it, and you know, you're in there for 5 minutes and nobody comes and speaks to you because they don't want to acknowledge your existence, or they don't think that you can afford the cost of the items in that store. So
well, maybe I'll ask a question too. How many of you go into a bathroom, a washroom, a toilet, a WC, and the place is really messy, and you clean it up before you walk out? Is that right? Oh, okay. For a Black person, you know, recently I was at one of the theaters, and I walked in there, and the seat was a mess. Water all over it.
Yeah.
Right? I had to go, so I went. But you know what I did before I left? I took and I cleaned it off, because I know there was a long, long line, and I know people had seen me in the line, and I know who was behind me in the line, and I know what was going to be said.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
It was that Black woman who made such a mess.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there is something that, again, brings that kind of responsibility, that you have to, what would they say, take one for the team?
Well, absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
Always having to take one for the team.
That's right, because if that person goes to the washroom and sees that it's dirty, they're going to say, oh, it's that dirty Black woman. And then they're going to be looking at other Black people and thinking, well, they're all dirty and disgusting and what have you. Am I right? Yes, absolutely. You know, and you when you have children, you teach them the same things. You got to speak like this. You got to be like this, because you know that if they don't, that they're going to be, they're going to have a negative stereotype attached to them, and therefore not treated with the respect and dignity that they deserve, right? So there was a question posed, and we're in the context of systemic racism, we're in the context of privilege. So what I want to do is just insert a little bit about systemic racism, and then we'll go to privilege in a minute. So our RCMP, the head of the RCMP, right, does not shared openly that she does not think that systemic racism exists in the RCMP, and then she's had difficulty even defining systemic racism. So can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, it goes back to the whole Canadian notion that we are not racist as Canadians, right? There are a few bad apples out there who are doing whatever, but on the whole, Canada, I mean, Doug Ford said, our premier said something similar.
He did.
Right? As did
the premier of the Quebec.
Premier of Quebec.
Yeah.
So it's a failure of wanting to recognize our history and wanting to recognize that what there is in the society. We have had 2 or 3 UN rapporteurs on racism, discrimination, Indigenous people, etc., who've come to Canada and who've watched the situation and document the situation in Canada and went back and wrote reports that spoke to the discrimination level, the racism level that they saw in Canada. And yet there is denial.
Right.
And I think for the RCMP person, commissioner, to say, yes, there is racism, she felt that she would be condemning her entire team or all of her officers with that brush, as it were, not recognizing that it's not something that's leveled against one person, but it's against a whole system.
It's a system.
The rules under which they operate.
Right.
The procedures, the policies, the way they're trained, the things that they are in the. So to deny systemic racism is really not to understand what is within those policies, right, that you are implementing that create difficulty for others.
Right. That create, and can I say perpetuate difficulty?
Yes.
I know,
yes.
Absolutely create. I agree with that, but perpetuate. And in order for us to be able to dismantle that, we have to admit that it exists. And we have to admit that Canada is a racist society. We were built on that. We were built on slavery. So all of everything we do, all of our institutions, the thinking behind our institutions, our policies and procedures are based on the belief that Black people, people of color, are inferior. So we are all in the soup together.
But the thing is that we also have to acknowledge that there are many, many past wrongs in Canadian society. Whether it is a ship that we turned around, whether it is the instance with Jewish people, whether it's the instance with Italians, whether it's, I mean, we've gone through a number of past wrongs. Yes. I mean, the highest of all is our treatment of our indigenous peoples.
That's right.
But we have to acknowledge that.
Yes.
And so to say, well, we're not a racist society, the racist society south of us. Well, the racist society south of us, things are not nuanced as it is nuanced in Canadian, in Canadian society. So I don't think that I'll walk around saying that Canada is a racist society. I would say that racism is embedded in many of the institutions and in many of the laws and the making. You know.
And manifests itself in the treatment of Black people, and manifests itself in the fact that Black people are marginalized. So in terms of housing, in terms of employment, food. I mean, you know, there was a recent article that came out that Black people in the GTA are 50% more likely to have food insecurity, to not have enough food to nourish themselves.
Of course, yes. Yeah. And what is COVID has shown up, where some of these gaps are. The issue of mental health, the issue of incarceration, the levels of incarceration.
Right. Yeah, we're only 2.9% of the population, Black people, and we're over 20%.
Yes.
We're only 2.9%. Just that's it. Less than 3% of the population of Canada, and 20% of a lot of Black men, to be blunt, are in the prison system. It's just that statistic is just it's deplorable. So I just want to say something though in terms of white privilege or white advantage, for me. And I just want to say this: if you are feeling like, I have a disadvantage, things have not been easy for me, I absolutely, I acknowledge that. So talking about white advantage or white privilege is not to say that other people do not have challenges and don't experience hardship, or, we're not saying that. Do we agree with that?
I think we have to make sure that that when we speak about anti-Black racism, when we talk about racism, when we talk about systemic racism, when we talk about prejudice, what we want white people to do is not to recoil and say, oh my God, that's not me, that's not whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really to become aware and to look around and to make some judgments about what they see happen in the society,
Mm-hmm.
to question themselves as to what their relationships are. And we all have prejudices. We all have things that we have to examine all the time so that we could change those behaviors that create something. And I think it's important for us to know that when we discuss this, it's not to make someone who is not Black uncomfortable.
That's right.
It's just a reality. This is who we are in this world where we're all travelers together.
That's
and
right.
then because we're all travelers together and we want to make the journey such that all of us can have some good experiences, then we need to know each other. We need to know what is, what hurts the other, what ails the other. And we need to be able to say, what can I do?
Yeah. So these are not comfortable conversations, Dr. Augustin. They are not, right? And you know, and these conversations need to happen. But the purpose of them is not to make white people feel badly. That's not the point. It is to bring about a recognition that there are people, other human beings that are being treated badly on the sole basis of the color of their skin, right? That exists in Canada, in Toronto, and it exists right now. It's going on right now. So at this moment, there are racist situations happening, and there are lives being impacted. Mental health, you know, the ability to have a great future, to fulfill your potential. All of those things are happening right now, and it's that system and it's those thoughts and beliefs that are creating those. But it's not for people to feel badly because you were born into this. You didn't create this. And so these conversations are uncomfortable, but we have to have them because if we don't, then things will not change. And we are doing a disservice to a significant number of people, and being good people, we certainly don't want to do that, which is also part of the reason that we're a part of this organization.
Well, the thing is that we cannot be looking to the South and feeling smart and feeling that as Canadians it's not happening. There is a piece that Martin Luther King wrote from his Birmingham jail. When you are harried by day and haunted by night by the fact that you are a Negro, living constantly at tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect next, and are plagued with inner fears and outer resentments, when you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiedness, then you understand why it's so difficult to have this conversation.
Right, and it's happening right now. So that was written perhaps in the 1960s. Yeah, and I can say that there are people that could speak of that now and feel that way now.
And this is what's happening to our children, Karen, in school.
Yeah,
right?
That feeling of nobodiedness.
That feeling of nobodiedness, that feeling of, how do I explain my hair? How do I explain the color of my skin? How do I explain? And you know, there were days in the old days when I was in the classroom, there were kids who were hiding their lunches because this was what the parents made. They were European children, and this was the kind of sandwich that mother made. And they were ashamed to bring the sandwich out. Nowadays, we're eating it out in the open. But in those days, they didn't want to, you know, the kids would would tease them about the smell, about the, you know, what this, and so we have to move past that. We have to move past so
Other
that we,
people.
so that we could understand each other.
Mm-hmm.
We could understand, and that therefore, and as educators, we have to present those images to our children.
Yes.
If we're doing a collage, we need to put everybody in there,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
not just the sexy movie stars.
True. And you know, and that extends to everywhere in the business world. It has to be a collage of everybody, right?
Yes.
But it's not just like a photo op to make your organization or your company look good. It needs to actually be in existence. Like, you need to have that representation. You don't just, you know, put a bunch of people for your photo op so that your company looks diverse, right? Yet the people of color that you put in your photo op are working in the mailroom, for example, or are the caretakers. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be substantive. But I will leave that alone and continue with the rest of the questions because we are running out of time. So Dr. Augustin, I want to go back to your conversation about being in the plane with that individual.
Yes.
And then I want to ask you, because we all can refer to this story, does being respectable, having, you know, a high level of education, being affluent, living in a great neighborhood, having a bunch of degrees, you know, earning a very good salary, driving a great car, knowing the right people, does that shield you or anybody from racism?
That does not shield you from racism. That does not, and we used to have a conversation before, you know, you are Grenadian, I'm Jamaican, you Trinidadian. And when someone is going to be racist, they don't ask, where are you from? Before they discriminate, no. Right? No. And the same with, they don't ask how much money you have. Granted, one of the things that would shield you would be you'd find yourself in an environment where there are the whatever real things of life are there, but at the same time, you are always viewed in a different in a different way. There are always questions as to how you got your money.
How did you get here?
How did you get here?
Yeah.
You know, and there are all kinds of when people discriminate and when people have notions about the other, they don't stop and ask, did he drive up in whatever car, or does he live in whatever neighborhood? I think they see the color and then that's it.
Exactly. You know, I've been told, oh, Karen, that would never happen to you. You know, you look so respectable. You look like this and you speak like this. But that doesn't matter, right? As long as you have black skin, of whatever shade, doesn't matter what you've achieved and who you are, you will be discriminated against. It doesn't shield you. And so when people say, why doesn't, you know, the Black community get together? Why aren't there more people doing this or doing that? Then it's really not that we lack people that have achieved. It's not that we lack incredibly educated people. It's not that we even lack community organization. It is the lens that people put on us that makes it seem like, you know, we're less than we are, which is
but
not
there
the
is
case.
Something else, Karen, and you know, I'm not too sure how prevalent that is now. When 3-4 Black people are standing together, let's suppose you go to a funeral, an occasion, a conference, and you see other people you haven't seen in years, and 3-4 of you get together and saying, hi, how are you, long time? Some white person always comes by and say, what are you guys planning now?
I know. Or that there's a feeling of discomfort, you know, when Black people congregate in a white space, in a white, can I just make it clear, in a white space? So it could be your workplace, it could be, you know, a social engagement.
Or the kids in school, the kids in the cafeteria.
Or yes, in the cafeteria. I don't understand, Dr. Augustin, why it is that when Black people congregate and speak to each other, that it's looked at in such a negative way. Well, I do understand, but I'm going to ask you.
It's because we stand out. And so it's very easy to, you know, to see this group of Black people over on the other side there. But at the same time, it is the fact that the powers that be and the people who are socialized in such a way can deal with us one by one by one.
Right.
But to have us as a group, it's very difficult to deal with the group. I can walk anywhere and go into a group of 4 or 5 white people standing together and put my hand out and say, I'm Jean Augustine, I'm Jean Augustine, and get myself into the circle, right? And be part of it. I think for most white people, there's a bit of uncomfortableness because again, it goes back to what I said. They have not made those friendships along the way. It's very difficult for them to come and say, I am Teresa, and just join the group.
Right. Yes.
And so we have to be conscious of that too, because we need, if we are going to be open, we have to be conscious that we need to make that room for someone who is not Black to be part of the conversation circle.
You know, and I absolutely agree with that. But back again to our history, Dr. Augustine, which we can't get away from. And back to the fact that we're socialized to fear Black people. We are socialized to fear Black people. It's all over our, you know, films.
All over history. Yeah.
It's in our, you know, daily news reports. You know, who are the criminals? And the fact is, let me just say statistically, that Black people do not commit more crimes than white people. However, the media would have you believe that we are the most criminal and aberrant of human beings. And the reason why white people are uncomfortable with more than 2 or 3 Black people congregating is because they believe that somehow we're plotting something negative, or there's something, you know, subversive happening, which is not the case. And I need to say on record, when you see, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 Black people talking to each other, please know that we are not, you know, having a conversation to kind of erupt anything. It's just, we are just like, you know, another group of 3 or 4 or 5 white people talking, just, you know, having a conversation, being social. It's the same thing, but we need to just check our thinking and our biases to remember that perhaps if you're feeling the fear is not because of the people. The fear is because of the way you've been socialized.
Yeah. So I'll say, take a risk. If you see 3, 4 Black people standing together, take a risk and walk in there and say, hi. Thought I might join you guys.
Yeah.
And see what happens, because sometimes it's a fear that keep you away. And it's that sense of, I will not be welcomed.
Right.
It's keeping you away. And oftentimes that's not it at all.
It's not the case. That's not the case. And might I say, I was watching a documentary, and there was this, I was watching actually Oprah, the talk on race, and there was a question that came up. And the person, you know, one of the speakers was saying, you know, well, I don't know, how do I understand race? I've, you know, read books, I've watched YouTube, I've read articles, I've had conversations with my white friends. And the question, you know, and this was the answer, it's much more than just learning about it. You have to put yourself in Black spaces.
Yes.
If you would like to learn more, like authentically, about who Black people are, and be able to dispel some of your own stereotypes, some of your own prejudices, that you need to take that, of course, maybe uncomfortable step to maybe invite someone to your home, right? To build a friendship with that person. But even before that, to put yourself in spaces where Black people are. You know, it's kind of like exposure. Exposure therapy. It's kind of like that.
Let me tell you a story. I have been self-isolating since the middle of March.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a couple of white friends in the building, and they found this Caribbean store, and they've been bringing me things from the Caribbean store, things that I usually don't go out and get myself, but so they brought me stuff, and it is their way of saying, here is a little treat.
Yes.
And I kind of laugh, smile to myself, because I know that usually if I go myself to a Caribbean store, which I don't go very often, I wouldn't really, get the okras and and stuff like that. But it's a way of kind of reaching out. Right. And so I made sorrel, and I said, have you had sorrel? No. So I gave them a bottle of sorrel. Right. And I tell them how to pour some over ice, and they said they enjoyed that. But it's a matter of sharing, and it's a matter of getting to know people. And
getting out of your comfort zone, right? And going beyond being polite, because we know when you're just being polite and you want to move on to the next thing, and you're being polite because you want to be a good person, or you don't want to be perceived as being racist. We know that, we get that, but really it's going beyond just being polite and giving a Black person or a person of color, a minute or two of your time, and then moving on to something more important as far as you're concerned. It is holding the space, being in that space. So we're almost there, because we've already talked about implicit bias, and implicit bias is the way we're socialized. It's beliefs and attitudes and ideas that we have that we don't even know that we have, because we're socialized that way in Canada and in the United States. It was, we forget that we have a very similar history, Canada and the United States. And so, as you say, we have very similar things that we need to overcome. The way that our society is built is, and the mindset and the beliefs about Black people are the same, because we're all built on a slave economy, right? And in order to have a slave economy, you had to believe that Black people were less 3/5 human. And so that is inside of all of us, and we need to admit and accept that. And the only way that we're able to overcome those implicit beliefs that we don't even know that we have is to hold space with people of color and Black people specifically. Otherwise, you as a person are not going to be able to get beyond that. It's beyond reading and learning. So I'll just say that. Okay, so I want to talk about, and I know that we've sent a link to Dr. Ibram X. Kendi. So I'm hoping that you have had some time to do some research about this particular professor. And he says about racism, that being racist is not a fixed state of being. And it's not like you are or you aren't, right? And it's not necessarily actively going and oppressing. So it's not thinking like, I am going to do that to this Black person today, or I don't like Black people. That is not what being a racist is. I just want to make that clear. It's not, whether you are or are not. That's not what it is. Rather, it's what a person is saying or doing in the moment, okay, that upholds the idea that one race or group is inferior to another. For example, if you've heard something in mixed company, in a social, engagement or situation, or at work, or, with your partner, whatever, and it's when a racist comment is made and you stay silent, that is racism, right? That in that moment, by not doing something about it, it is upholding beliefs and ideas that say that one group is inferior to another.
Well, I think racism is learned. And we know that, you look at young children, if you give them the freedom to play and to associate, and you don't say anything around the dinner table, and you don't say anything about whatever, then it's a learned behavior. Right. And it's also a behavior that somehow, depending on one's own situation, things are really bad with me, but I want to know that there's somebody for whom something is even worse. So there is that sense that, you know, I am wherever, but there is someone below me, or someone who is, and so that's also part of this. But I think it's also important to know that as that is learned, it could be unlearned.
Right,
and
right.
and what you're doing now, the conversation, and hopefully the conversation would carry on with all the folks who are here, and they'll begin to look at their own sphere, their own endeavor. There is something that says to do nothing is to do something.
Right. You're either upholding or
Yeah.
you are dismantling, right?
And to say nothing is really to say something.
Yeah.
So just as we will not stand by and watch something happen and not interfere, if someone is doing something that is racist, that is discriminatory, then the onus is on us to challenge. The onus is on us to find a way, not be confrontational, but to find a way.
Yeah.
I was driving with a friend of mine a number of years ago, and we were driving through one of these Aboriginal communities between Ottawa and whatever. And she just unloaded and a whole lot of stuff about a thing. So I said, stop the car. She put her foot on it. She thought there was a, and I said, no, let's talk about this. Let's talk about this, because she had notions about Native people and Aboriginal people and wherever she picked that up. And I was not going to sit there and let her throw all of this out. And I made her stop the car. We had a really good discussion, and then we moved on with the hope that maybe she would have learned something from that, or she would have had the opportunity to rethink or to say to herself, I wonder why Jean was so upset when I said whatever.
Right.
And that would stay with her, because it stayed with me for a very long time. So we have to challenge. We have to challenge.
Yeah. So I saw a comment in the chat that I would like to, put out there. And I want to put it out there because this is important. And I just love the fact that, one of our members took a risk to share. And the comment is, as a white woman, I would feel uncomfortable walking into a group of Black individuals, as in I would feel unwelcome. Can we speak to that?
Well, I would imagine, depending on her socialization, the neighborhood you grew up in, or the school you went to, what those experiences were, that has shaped your thinking. If you were bullied, you were treated badly, or the people who were neighbors were not, were people that you didn't associate with, etc., etc., you become an adult with all kinds of sentiments and feelings about Black people. But if you're in a social gathering, you look for the appropriate social gathering. I wouldn't say that you walk in the middle of the mall and just go up to a group of Black people standing. But if you're in a social circle, right? Yeah. It's an invitation given to them. It's an invitation given to you. You're all in the same circle. There is nothing. It's a socializing, social environment. Or it's a conference and now it's broken up for coffee or for something like that. It's a social environment. I think that you need to take the risk and say, hello, my name is, I am from, or where are you from? And some small talk. And maybe the whole group may not just respond, but at least one person in the group will open up a bit, and that gives you entrance into into the entire group. I know that oftentimes it's our own socialization.
It is. And we are socialized to feel uncomfortable. I just want you to know the fact that you feel uncomfortable is not your fault. It's because you were socialized that way, is what Dr. Augustin is saying. to feel that way. But I assure you, let's say, you know, Marcia, myself, and Pauline were at a JLT function and we were all talking and you approached us, you would be so welcomed into the conversation. You need to know that. And that, you know, 99% of the time when you're in a social situation and you see a number of Black people speaking to each other, you would be a welcome member of that conversation. Please don't feel like you would not be welcomed. You absolutely would be. I just want to assure you of that. So we talked about the difference, you know, being, you know, not really saying anything and not kind of upholding a racist system, which we have in Canada, and then being an anti-racist, which is actively working at your own biases, right, within yourself, but also when you hear something, may not in the moment, you know, we do need to be sensitive, as Dr. Augustin said, about how we approach it. We don't want to put up barriers, but when the time is right, in an opportune moment, we need to address that. And that is the work of being an anti-racist. And I can say to you that if you do that, it is not comfortable. These are not comfortable conversations. You are gonna feel like I feel sometimes when you know, your heart is beating, you're thinking, am I gonna say it the right way? But you know what? There is not necessarily a right way to enter into an uncomfortable conversation because it's uncomfortable. We have to be willing to experience that discomfort, knowing that you are doing something to change what is happening in our society, which actually has led to the death of so many people. It leads to the death of, you know, people's death. So you need to know that in engaging in this conversation, that you are making a difference for perhaps somebody's life. You are making a difference for somebody's upward mobility, perhaps for somebody's quality of life. And I would say that discomfort that you may feel in that moment is worth it, if that's the payoff.
I think it's important in this time. I think that COVID and the fact that we have to self-isolate has given us the opportunity to be reflective.
Yes.
And then the second part is the Black Lives Matter movement that has come out of the George Floyd and all the atrocities and all the horrible things that have happened to Black people over the many years. I think it is, those two things have collided in such a way that it forces us to look at our own selves, to look at our own privileges, to look at the situation around us and to say, how can we be better human beings? How can we share this planet with others? How can we ensure that our behaviors, whether in an institutional setting or on an individual basis in our homes, what are we teaching our children? What models and mentors, mentoring we do? How can we contribute to make society? And I think maybe this is the opportunity that's offered us to do that reflection and to come out on the other side feeling better for what we have accomplished as we look at other people in the world.
Right. So those of us who have privilege, and I include myself in that, we all have work to do, right? Because there's so much that needs to change. And as you said, we don't want to wait until 2025 because lives are at stake and we need to get moving now. And so this is you know, the final question, Dr. Augustin. Thank you so much for, you know, just your incredible responses. And so we're going to close with this question. So there are different ways of being white, and those of us that have a choice as to, you know, as white people, you know, to become champions of justice and social healing. In the same way, those of us with privilege, and I include myself, have work to do. And knowing that anti-racism work is both internal and collective, where do you suggest we begin our anti-racism journey as a league?
They say every journey begins with me. Every journey begins by looking at yourself, taking this conversation and playing it around in your own head and asking yourself, how many people of color do I know? How many people of color are part of my network? How many people of color do I socialize with? And is there some way I can open this up a little bit, take one at a time? What am I saying to my kids? What am I saying to the people around me about those people? And how do I change that kind of conversation into a more respectful one? Right. Then, of course, looking at our associates or work colleagues, and then seeing opportunities for them. And even those of you not grabbing everything yourself, but sharing, making sure that someone gets pulled into the circle. Yes. And recognizing that that person has talent and skill, and that those talent and skills are skills that could be shared with everyone. It has to start right with us, right in our own hearts, right with our own selves, and then moving that out. And as we talked about earlier, watching our conversations, and listening to those who speak and who put things in our air that sometimes we need to help them to deconstruct and to rethink what they just said. And there's always a very easy way. Did I hear you say? Right. Did I hear? and that also creates, so that we're not kind of, squabbling with our friends or squabbling with our partners or whatever, but it's how we kind of give the I message, did I hear you? So maybe we could, and then being open in terms of our own likes and dislikes, and how we express those likes and dislikes, and how we become more conscious. Yeah. People in the society. Yeah. Who need so much, those people with mental health, those people with poor housing. And I go back to my grandmother's old thing, there but for the grace of God. Right. We just never know who, if it might be us at some point. And we would expect that if we were in that position to be treated with respect and dignity. Yeah. So, Dr. Augustin, you are a wealth. Absolutely a wealth, and so deep. And I need to say it has been a privilege to have this conversation with you, and a learning opportunity. I've learned so much. And I know that there are absolutely there are quite a few comments in the comment section, and we've gone a while. But if you have a question, members, to pose to Dr. Augustin, please feel free to include that in the chat. I'm happy to share those with her. I have shared some of the questions as we've had our conversation, but feel free to share a comment or a question. And we'll just give you maybe, 17 seconds to do that. So we'll just pause for a moment, give you 17 seconds to maybe formulate something in your mind that you might want to share, or a question.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you again for participating, Dr. Augustin. We truly appreciate you being here. I'm not sure if any of the folks here are aware that there was a new initiative that was launched. It's called the Black what is it called?
Black North?
The Black North, thank you, the Black North. It was established by Wes Hall, and I went to high school with Wes. He's a friend of mine, and just the other day, during this entire, I guess, unrest, he said his son, he's married to a white woman, so they have biracial children. He said his son, who goes to a private school, they live in Rosedale, came home crying, grabbed his mom and said, I don't want to be Black anymore. I was called the N-word. And so this is he's 6, he's 6, and they were beside themselves that even in institutions or settings that you think would have some kind of buffer, there is none. And so from where I'm sitting, you know, I've been doing a lot of advocacy and sharing information, and learning is a big part of this movement. You know, we've all been socialized, we've all learned things that are not necessarily fit for moving us forward. And so I encourage you to take on some of the ownership of learning new ways of being and unlearning some of what has been taught to you, what you've been socialized to believe is okay when interacting with people of color. And I say people of color because it's not only Black and brown, but you know, a lot of racialized people that are experiencing really harsh treatments because of being different, being the other. So I thank you.
Yes, thank you. So there was one question, and it says, how do we deal with implicit bias then? It seems fixing the system isn't enough.
Well, we have to recognize that there are measures. There are measures that we can use. We did that when we were talking about things like equal pay for work of equal value, treating men and women in such a way. If one group is disadvantaged as a result of that specific policy, then there is bias in the policy and things that lead, that make a difference for some people and not for others. I think bias is built in, somehow is built into policies and built into what to keep some people out and to bring some people in, to give advantage to some and to disadvantage some. And I think it's one of the things that when there is training done in an institutional setting, that they talk about bias. Look at the policy, look at their mandate, their mission statements, their promotional opportunities, and the kind of questions that you ask in a job interview that can show bias interview settings are usually places where some of the bias show up.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, Dr. Augustin, you know, I think, yeah, we've covered all the questions, and we just want to say a huge thank you for sharing your insights with us. And we hope this is not the last time that we will have a chance to have a conversation with you as we continue our work as a league. And this is a wonderful beginning to have these conversations and to have a context in terms of our country, because someone said, you know, I'm tired of people, like one of our members, I'm tired of Canada being portrayed as, you know, not a racist society, and the focus being on the United States. And I need to say that I do believe that Dr. Augustin has painted the picture that we really are not different. We are no different than the United States. It's just, I think in some ways it's a little bit more insidious because we are so polite about it, right?
It's nuanced.
Right, nuanced about it. But it's no less damaging. It's no less hurtful. It's no less marginalizing to people, racialized people, and people of color. It's you know, it's just as damaging, and the results are very much the same when you cross the border over to Canada. So I just wanted to make sure that we're aware of that, and it's clear to all of us as a league. So with that, I want to say thank you, all of you, for attending. As you know, this conversation has been recorded, and there were many questions with regards to resources and such. I will certainly share the resources that I mentioned in our conversation today, and there were a number of them as well that were shared in the chat. So please take advantage of that. I'm not sure if the chat can be saved, the conversation can be saved, but I'm not sure the chat is savable. So please take a moment to avail yourself of any resources that might be in the chat. And I noticed that, I'm not sure if Terry is still here. I'm thinking that perhaps not. So I wanted to allow her to say a few words, but I will do that in her stead.
I'm here.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, Terry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I'll make this real quick. First of all, Dr. Augustin, it's been a privilege and an absolute pleasure. Thank you for enlightening us and for sharing your personal stories. It's been a terrific evening. Marcia, thank you to you for making this all possible. Karen, you've done just an absolutely amazing job.
Yeah, yes.
Your passion, your energy, terrific questions. Honestly, you should consider a career as a broadcaster. It's just
She has transferable skills.
She's a terrific woman, I'm learning. And to each and every one of you who has joined, thank you for making time to be part of this conversation. And a special thank you to the Hamilton, Burlington, and Calgary Leagues for joining us. Thank you, absolutely everybody, and especially Dr. Augustin, Marcia.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Well done, Dr. Augustin.
It's been
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so again, thank you everyone, and I bid you a wonderful rest of your evening. And we will be in touch because there will be more conversations. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just also
Thanks,
wanted
Karen.
to say thanks to Elma for
Oh,
being
Elma.
the lead. Thank you, Elma, for being the lead on our committee, on the training committee. You are doing an
Awesome.
amazing
Yes,
job.
thank
Yes.
you.
And we just
Thank
thank
you,
you
ladies.
for, you know, when we had our first meeting and we talked about what could be the possibilities, and I suggested this, without a doubt, you're like, yes, let's do this. So I thank you
We
for
needed to.
stepping in and for believing in moving
Well
our
done.
organization forward. So
No.
thank you, Elma.
Thank you all. Thank you, Marcia,
you.
for bridging the gap. I appreciate everybody tuning in. This was amazing. Hopefully we can do more of this. The conversation will continue. But yes, thank you, everyone. We will be in touch. We will forward all this information over. Dr. Augustin, you've been amazing. I think we're all in awe right now. Captivated. Time flew. And I think we can talk for 4 more hours. But thank you, ladies. Thank you, everyone, for joining. With that, I wish you a wonderful evening, and we will be in touch.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.